I wrote the report that started the invasion. I want to say that first, before I say anything else, because everything I'm about to tell you is, in some sense, my fault. I was the surveyor, the one who assessed Earth's value and recommended we take it. I sat in a survey ship in high orbit for 200 days, and I counted what that world was worth, and I wrote a number at the bottom of a report. And on the strength of that number, 400,000 of my people came down out of the sky to collect it. The number was wrong, not the arithmetic. The arithmetic was perfect. The number was wrong because I'd measured the wrong thing entirely, and I didn't understand what the right thing was until it was much too late. Let me tell you what I missed. My name is Olton Reb. I belong to the Sethic Concordance, and within it to the Assessment Corps, which is exactly what it sounds like. The people who decide what a world is worth before anyone bothers to take it. You have to understand how the concordance worked because the whole catastrophe grew out of it. The Sethic were not by nature a warlike people. I know that's hard to believe given what we did, but it's true and it matters. We were merchants, logisticians, a vast, ancient, efficient civilization built on the orderly extraction and movement of resources across 1,000 worlds. We didn't conquer for glory. We had no warrior culture, no honor in battle, no taste for violence as such. We conquered the way a mining company strips a mountain, not from hatred, but from accounting. A world had resources, the resources had value, the value exceeded the cost of extraction, therefore extract. It was all very civilized. That's the part I need you to sit with. We were not monsters howling for blood. We were spreadsheets that had learned to fly. We came to worlds the way an invoice comes to a debtor, with regret and efficiency and no real malice, and we took what the numbers said to take and we moved on. We'd done it 900 times. It always worked because the math always worked because we were very, very good at math. My job was the first step, the survey. Before the concordance committed the enormous cost of an extraction fleet, someone had to go and count, to assess a target world's resources, weigh them against the projected cost of taking them, and produce the number that decided whether the world lived its life unbothered or got an invoice from the sky. I was good at my job, the best, some said. In 40 years of surveys, I'd never produced a number that the extraction came in under. My assessments were trusted absolutely. When Olton Reb said a world was worth taking, the concordance took it, and the concordance was never disappointed. And then I surveyed Earth. I spent 200 days in orbit over your world, and I want to tell you what I saw, because what I saw was real, and it was the truth, and it was also the most catastrophic misunderstanding of my entire life. Earth was rich. That was the headline of my report, and it was correct. By the concordance's standard measures, Earth was one of the most resource-dense worlds I'd ever assessed. Water, vast oceans of it, the most valuable substance in the galaxy, and Earth was drowning in it. Metals, in quantities and accessibility that made my instruments sing. Rare elements. Biological diversity beyond cataloging. Energy resources the humans were barely tapping. By every metric the Assessment Corps had ever developed, Earth was a prize, a fat, soft, undefended prize, sitting in an unremarkable system, ripe for the taking. And this was the crucial line in my report, the line that killed 400,000 of my people. Earth was militarily negligible. I need to explain how I reached that conclusion, because it's the heart of everything, and because I reached it honestly, and because it was completely, fatally wrong. The concordance assessed military threat the way it assessed everything, by accounting. You counted a world's dedicated military assets, its warships, its armies, its weapons systems, the things a civilization had specifically built for the purpose of war and set aside from everything else and maintained as instruments of violence. That was the measure. A world's threat was the sum of the things it had purpose-built for killing. And by that measure, Earth was almost laughable. Humanity had no spacefaring military to speak of, a few orbital platforms, some primitive satellites, nothing that could touch a concordance fleet. Their ground forces, even pooled across their fractured hundred-odd governments, amounted to a rounding error against an extraction fleet. Their dedicated weapons, while numerous, were crude, chemical propellants, primitive explosives, the armaments of a species that hadn't yet left its own gravity well in any serious way. I counted all of it. I counted every tank, every aircraft, every warship on every ocean, every missile in every silo. I added it up, and against the projected force of a concordance extraction fleet, it came to almost nothing. Militarily negligible, I wrote it with confidence. The world was rich and the world was soft, take it. Here is what I did not count. Here is the line I didn't write, because it never occurred to me that it needed writing, because no world I'd ever surveyed in 900 surveys had ever required it. I counted the things humans had built for war. I never once counted the things humans could turn into war, because on every other world I'd ever assessed, those were the same list. A civilization's weapons were its weapons, and its tools were its tools, and the two were different categories, kept separate, the way any orderly civilization keeps them separate. I had no idea, none of us had any idea, that we were about to invade the one world in the galaxy where that line had never been drawn. Let me tell you how the invasion began, because the beginning was easy, and the easiness was the trap. The extraction fleet arrived 80 days after my report was approved. 400,000 Sethic personnel, not soldiers mostly, I keep stressing this, but extraction personnel. Miners, logisticians, processing crews, surveyors like me, and a comparatively small security force to handle the negligible resistance my report had predicted. We came down out of the sky over the major population and industrial centers, exactly as doctrine prescribed, and we delivered the standard concordance demand. Surrender your world's resources for orderly extraction, and you will not be harmed. Resist, and the extraction proceeds anyway over your objections. It was, by concordance standards, a gentle invasion. We weren't there to exterminate humanity. Extermination is expensive and wasteful. You don't burn the workers when you can just take the mine. We were there to manage Earth, to fold it into the Concordance's extraction network, to take its water and metals and energy and ship them out to the 1,000 worlds that needed them, while the human population went on living, more or less, under new management. An invoice from the sky. Regrettable, efficient, survivable. And at first it went exactly as my report predicted. The dedicated human military, the warships, the aircraft, the armies engaged us, and was exactly as I'd calculated militarily negligible. We swept it aside in the first days. The crude chemical weapons, the primitive missiles, the tanks and the jets, our forces turned all of it because our forces were built to turn exactly that, the purpose-built weapons of a young species. The number held. The accounting was correct. Within a week, humanity's dedicated military was broken, and the Concordance Command declared the resistance phase concluded and the extraction phase begun. I remember the satisfaction in the command channels. The number had held. Olton Reb's assessment, perfect as always. The rich, soft world was ours, its toy weapons swept aside, and now we would begin the orderly business of taking what we'd come for. I shared the satisfaction for about 9 more days. Because then the extraction began. And extraction meant going down out of the secure landing zones into the human cities and countryside and industry to actually take the resources. And the resources were everywhere, and so were the humans, and the humans' dedicated military was gone, broken, finished. But the humans weren't finished, not even slightly, because we'd broken the only part of them I'd known how to count, and the part I hadn't known how to count was just getting started. I have to explain the thing about humans, the thing I'd missed, the thing that no survey in the galaxy was built to detect. And to explain it, I have to tell you about the first report that made my blood run cold, though I didn't understand yet why it should. It came in from an extraction team working a region of human agricultural land. Routine. Take the water rights, secure the processing, fold the farmland into the network. And the report said the team had been attacked. Fine, we expected scattered resistance. But the report described the attack, and the description was the thing that made me stop and read it twice, and then a third time with a cold I couldn't name spreading through me. The humans hadn't attacked with weapons. They'd attacked with farm equipment. A vehicle the report called a combine harvester, an enormous agricultural machine built for cutting and thrashing crops, had been driven into the extraction team at speed, its cutting mechanism running. A thing built to harvest wheat had harvested a Sethic security squad instead. And the humans operating it hadn't modified it, hadn't built a weapon, they just used it, the way you'd use anything. Because to them the distance between machine that cuts wheat and machine that cuts the enemy was apparently no distance at all. It was the same machine. It cut things. The enemy was a thing. The logic was immediate and total and utterly foreign to me. I filed it as an anomaly, a desperate improvisation. It would not, I assured command, be representative. It was completely representative. It was the single most representative thing about the entire species, and within a month it would be the only thing that mattered, and I would understand, finally and forever, what I had failed to count. The reports kept coming, and as they came, the cold in me grew into something I'd never felt in 40 years of assessment. The horror of a man watching his own perfect arithmetic become a death sentence, one impossible line item at a time. A fuel depot, ours, captured early in the extraction, destroyed by humans who'd driven a water truck into it, except the water truck wasn't carrying water. It was carrying a mixture of agricultural chemicals that any human farmer apparently knew could be made to explode, fertilizer and fuel, common as dirt, sitting in barns across the whole planet. A farming supply had become a bomb large enough to crater our depot, and the humans who made it hadn't needed a weapons factory. They'd needed a barn. A Sethic processing facility, fortified, defended, breached not by an army but by humans who'd rerouted the facility's own industrial machinery against it, who understood the captured equipment better than our own crews did within days, who turned the cutting and pressing and lifting machines of the facility into the instruments of its destruction. They didn't bring weapons to the facility. The facility was full of weapons. It had always been full of weapons. We'd just been calling them equipment, because that's what they were called on every other world. Mining charges, the explosives we used for extraction, our own tools stolen and used against us, of course, but worse. Humans manufacturing their own in quantities that horrified me, from materials I'd catalogued in my survey as resources, as inventory, as the very prize we'd come to take. The metals I'd counted became blades and projectiles and shrapnel. The chemicals I'd counted became explosives and propellants and poisons. The fuel I'd counted became fire. Every single resource I had so carefully assessed and assigned a value to, every line item in the report that started the invasion, the humans were turning into a weapon and using it against the people who'd come to collect it. I had written a report that said, "This world is rich in resources and poor in weapons." I understood slowly, sickeningly, that I had written a contradiction. That on Earth, those were the same sentence. That a world rich in resources is, to a human, a world rich in weapons, because a human does not distinguish between the two, has never distinguished between the two, cannot conceive of the distinction. We had not invaded a rich, soft, undefended world. We had invaded the single largest arsenal in the galaxy, and called it undefended because the arsenal was disguised as a planet. I need to tell you about the conversation that finally made me understand it, really understand it, in my bones, not just in my reports, because understanding it is the only thing that lets the rest of the story make sense. We had a human prisoner. Early in the extraction, before things fully fell apart, a human we'd captured, an ordinary one, not a soldier, a person whose occupation our records listed as civil engineer, which I understood to mean a builder of roads and bridges, a non-combatant. I went to speak with him myself because I was the surveyor, and I needed to understand what my survey had missed, and I thought a builder of roads might be safe to ask. I asked him, through the translator civil, the way one professional speaks to another, why his people fought with tools instead of weapons, why they hadn't simply surrendered when their real military, their dedicated weapons, had been broken. What they imagined they could accomplish, a species of farmers and builders and engineers, against the organized force of the concordants, now that their actual arms were gone. And the human looked at me, this ordinary builder of roads, with an expression I've spent the rest of my life trying to forget, and he said, "You think our military was our weapons?" It wasn't a question. He said it slowly, the way you explain something to a child or to someone who has made a mistake so fundamental that you almost feel sorry for them. That's your whole problem, isn't it? You looked at our tanks and our planes and our guns and you thought that's what these people can hurt us with, and you broke it and you thought you were safe. He shook his head. Mister, where I'm from, the military is just the part of us that does this full time. It was never where our strength was. Our strength is that every single one of us, every farmer and every builder and every kid with a chemistry set, grew up on a world where everything can kill you or save you depending on how you point it. We don't have weapons and tools. We never did. We have things and we decide what they are when we need them. You didn't disarm us when you broke our army. You can't disarm us. To disarm us, you'd have to take away every object on the entire planet, including the planet, because we'll make a weapon out of that too. Just watch us. He leaned forward. You came to take our resources. Friend, our resources are the weapons. They were always the weapons. You just flew 400,000 people into a warehouse full of guns and started picking them up, and you're surprised the guns are going off. I went back to my survey ship that night, and I read my own report again, the perfect one, the one that started the invasion, and for the first time in 40 years I understood what assessment actually was and what I'd actually done. I'd flown to a world, and I'd counted the guns, and I'd written no guns here, only resources, because I came from a civilization that knew the difference. And I'd recommended we invade the one place in all the galaxy where there is no difference, where there has never been a difference, where 100,000 years of living on a world that was always trying to kill them had built a species that picks up anything and knows, instantly, instinctively in the oldest part of itself, exactly how to make it lethal. 400,000 of my people were on the ground, in the warehouse, picking up the inventory. And the inventory was starting to pick them up back. The thing about an accounting civilization is that it cannot, structurally, admit when the numbers break. I need you to understand this, because it's the reason the invasion didn't end in week 2, when it should have, when any sane people would have looked at the casualty reports and gone home. The concordance didn't go home. The concordance did what accounting civilizations do when reality stops matching the spreadsheet. It assumed the spreadsheet was right, and reality was making an error. Let me show you how that worked, because watching it happen, watching my own people refuse to see the thing I'd started to see, was its own particular horror, separate from the dying. The reports of human resistance kept climbing, not the dedicated military that was gone exactly as I'd predicted. That part of my report had been perfect. This was the other thing, the farm equipment, the fertilizer, the repurposed industry, the endless, inexhaustible, planet-wide phenomenon of humans turning whatever was nearest into a thing that killed Sethic personnel. The casualty figures from the extraction phase, the phase that was supposed to be safe, the phase after the war was won, climbed past the casualty figures from the actual war, and then doubled them, and then doubled again. And Concordance Command's response was to revise the extraction methodology, not the assessment, not the decision to be there. The methodology. Because in the mind of an accounting civilization, if extraction is costing more than projected, the answer is to improve extraction efficiency, not to question whether the world should be extracted at all. The world's value hadn't changed. Earth was still rich. The water and metals and energy were all still there. The number at the bottom of my report was still, in the narrow sense, correct. So Command reasoned. The resources are real, the value is real, therefore the problem is execution. Send more personnel. Tighten the security protocols. Improve the casualty projections. Make the spreadsheet work. They sent more personnel into the warehouse full of guns to pick up more inventory more carefully. I tried to tell them. I went up the chain, the surveyor who'd written the report, surely they'd listen to me. I said, the problem is not our methodology. The problem is the fundamental assumption of the assessment. I counted this world's weapons and found them negligible. But on this world there is no such category as weapons, because everything is a weapon, because the resources we came to take are the same objects the humans kill us with, and you cannot extract a resource from a population that experiences your extraction equipment, and your extraction personnel, and the resource itself, as material to be turned against you. We are not in a war we are winning slowly. We are in a war we cannot win at all, because the more of the planet we touch, the more weapons we hand to the enemy, because the planet is the weapon. And Command heard me. They were not stupid. The Concordance was never stupid. And they did the thing that I think finally broke something in me about my own civilization. They asked me for a revised number. Not should we leave. They asked me to resurvey, to produce a new assessment, a corrected figure that accounted for the higher than projected extraction costs, so they could determine whether Earth was still worth taking at the new, higher price. They turned the catastrophe into a line-item revision. The humans turning their whole world into weapons against us was, to Concordance Command, an unexpectedly high extraction cost to be weighed against the unchanged resource value. And if the value still exceeded the cost, the extraction would proceed, because that is what the numbers demanded, and the Concordance served the numbers the way other civilizations serve gods. I understood then that my people were going to keep feeding personnel into Earth until either the math finally turned negative or there were no more personnel to feed, because we had never, in 900 surveys, encountered a world that could not be solved by the right number, and we could not conceive that we had finally found one. The spreadsheet does not have a cell for this world is not a resource. It is a predator wearing the shape of a resource. There was no line for it. So there was no way for the Concordance to see it. I had built my whole life and career on the faith that the numbers told the truth, and I was watching the numbers march 400,000 of my people into a grave, politely, efficiently, one revised assessment at a time. I have to tell you what the extraction actually became on the ground, because the abstraction of it, higher than projected costs, hides the thing itself, and the thing itself is what I can't forget. We had come to take Earth's resources, and taking a resource means concentrating it, gathering the water, stockpiling the metal, accumulating the fuel, building the processing centers and the stockpiles and the shipment hubs where the wealth of a world gets collected for transport off-world. That's extraction. You gather the valuable thing into one place so you can ship it. And every place we gathered it became a bomb. Do you see it? Do you see the trap we'd walked into, the trap I'd drawn the map for? We came to a world where everything is a weapon, and our entire purpose was to gather the everything into concentrated piles. We were building the humans' arsenals for them. Every fuel depot we established was a fuel-air explosive waiting for one human with a match. Every metal stockpile was raw material for 10,000 blades and projectiles, sitting unguarded enough that humans bled us white stealing from it. Every concentration of resource that our methodology demanded was a concentration of weapon that the humans, who saw no difference, simply used. The processing centers were the worst. We built them to refine what we took, and the humans, who understood industrial machinery in their bones, who had built all of it in the first place, infiltrated and seized and turned those centers into the most efficient weapons factories on the planet, manufacturing against us at industrial scale, using the very infrastructure we'd brought to rob them. We handed them factories. We thought we were handing them defeat. To a human, a factory the enemy built on your soil is not a symbol of your defeat. It's a gift. It's a weapon you didn't have to build yourself. You just take it, the way you take everything, the way the species takes anything and knows instantly what it's for. There was a moment, I logged it, I have the record, when a concordance processing supervisor reported with genuine bewilderment that the humans seemed to be fighting harder in areas where we'd extracted more. He couldn't understand it. Logically, a stripped region should be a defeated region. You've taken its wealth, broken its capacity, what's left to fight with? But it was the opposite. The more thoroughly we extracted a region, the more ferociously and effectively its humans fought, and the supervisor filed it as an anomaly, a morale phenomenon, irrational human spite. It wasn't spite. It wasn't irrational. It was the simplest thing in the world, and I was the only Sethic who understood it, sitting in my survey ship with my perfect broken report. The more we extracted, the more we concentrated, and the more we concentrated, the more weapons we made, and the humans in the heavily extracted regions weren't fighting harder out of spite. They were fighting harder because we'd given them more to fight with. We were arming our enemy in direct proportion to how hard we robbed them. The accounting had inverted. Every unit of resource we successfully extracted increased the enemy's military capacity, because the resource and the weapon were the same object, and we were the ones gathering it into useful piles. It was, I realized, the perfect trap, and no one had set it. That was the thing. The humans hadn't planned this. There was no grand strategy, no secret preparation, no hidden plan to lure us in and turn our extraction against us. They were just being what they were, a species that picks up the nearest object and makes it lethal, applied to the situation of being invaded. We'd walked into the trap, and built the trap, and sprung the trap on ourselves, and the humans had simply done the most natural thing their nature allowed, which happened to be the most devastating thing that could possibly have been done to a civilization like ours. I want to tell you about the day I stopped being a loyal Sethic surveyor and started being whatever I am now, the thing that tells this story. Because there was a day. There's always a day. Command had ordered a demonstration. The extraction was bleeding us, the casualty figures were impossible, and rather than question the premise, Command decided to break human morale with a show of force, to remind the planet what it was facing. They selected a human city, one that had been a center of resistance, and they prepared to make an example of it. Not extraction, destruction. The concordance rarely did this. It was wasteful. It destroyed resource value. But Command had decided that the cost of the example was worth the deterrence, that a sufficiently terrible demonstration would finally make the humans behave like a properly conquered population, would make them surrender their resources like every other world had. I was ordered to assess the target, to confirm the city's resource value before we destroyed it, so the loss could be properly entered into the accounts. One last survey, one last number, this one a debit. And I flew low over that city in my survey craft to make my assessment, and I saw the humans below, not soldiers. The whole population, ordinary humans, the farmers and builders and engineers and the children, the ones my report had called negligible, and they knew we were coming, they knew what the demonstration was, and they were not fleeing. They were preparing, calmly. The whole city turning itself in the hours before its destruction into one more weapon, every building a strong point, every vehicle a barricade or a battering ram. Every chemical in every workshop becoming something that would burn or blind or kill. An entire human city, facing certain destruction, doing the only thing the species knew how to do, picking up everything it had and pointing it at us, not because they thought they could win, but because that's simply what a human does when the storm comes. You don't surrender to the storm. You make the storm pay for every step. And I understood, hovering over that doomed, defiant city, that we could destroy it and it would not matter. We could destroy 100 cities, 1,000. And it would not matter, because every act of destruction concentrated the survivors' fury and scattered more weapons into more hands and proved to every watching human that surrender bought nothing, that the storm would take them whether they knelt or not, so they might as well make it pay. We were not breaking their morale. We were forging it. Each demonstration of our power was a demonstration that resistance cost nothing extra. And a species with nothing extra to lose is the most dangerous thing in creation, because it has already done the only calculation that matters and arrived at fight. I flew back to my ship, and I did not file the assessment. The first time in 40 years I refused an order. I sent a message to command instead, and it was 3 sentences, and it ended my career and probably saved what's left of my soul. There is no number that wins this world. The resource and the weapon are the same object, and the population is the resource, and you cannot extract a thing that fights back with itself. Leave or feed every soul we have into a planet that will arm itself with our own corpses. Command relieved me of duty. Of course they did. The surveyor had lost his nerve, gone native, broken under the strain. They had my report, the original, the perfect one, the one with the good number, and they trusted that, not the broken surveyor who'd written it. The number said the world was worth taking. The surveyor was just a man, and men break, but numbers don't. So they kept extracting. They destroyed the city. It changed nothing, exactly as I'd known it would. And they sent more personnel down into the warehouse to pick up more guns, while the man who'd drawn the map sat in a survey ship with no duties and watched the accounting that I'd started finally, slowly, begin to come due. People expect the end of this story to be a battle, a great human counterattack, a final stand, the moment the invaders are thrown back into the sky by some last desperate stroke of courage. That's how invasions end in the stories my people tell now, the ones who survived, the ones who weren't there. There was no final battle. I keep telling them that and they keep not believing it. The Concordance was not defeated in battle. The Concordance was defeated in the ledger, which is a far more terrible thing, and far more fitting, and far more permanent. Because you can recover from a lost battle, but you cannot recover from learning that your entire way of seeing the universe was wrong. Let me tell you how the accounting came due. It's the only ending this story ever had. I told you the Concordance would keep feeding personnel into Earth until either the math turned negative or there were no more personnel to feed. I want to walk you through exactly how the math turned negative, because it's the heart of everything, and because no one in my civilization had ever watched it happen before, and I am the only one who watched it happen with open eyes. The Concordance ran on a simple equation. Resource value minus extraction cost equals profit. Every world we'd ever taken had produced a profit because the value was always real and the cost was always manageable. That equation was the Concordance. It was our God and our government and our reason for crossing the dark between stars. Earth's resource value never dropped. That's the thing. I want to be precise because the precision is the horror. Even at the end, Earth was exactly as rich as my original survey said. The water, the metals, the energy, all still there, all still real. The value at the bottom of my report still correct in the narrow sense it had always been correct. The Concordance never stopped believing Earth was worth taking, because by the only measure it had, Earth was worth taking. But the extraction cost. The extraction cost climbed and would not stop climbing, because every unit we extracted armed the enemy, and every armed human raised the cost of extracting the next unit, in a feedback loop my civilization's mathematics had no model for. We were not paying a fixed price to take a fixed prize. We were paying a price that rose in proportion to how much we took, on a world where the prize and the weapon were the same object. The more we succeeded, the more it cost to succeed. The equation didn't have a stable solution. It had a runaway. And a civilization of accountants, faced with a runaway, kept doing the only thing it knew, pouring in more resources to bring the cost back under control, which was exactly the action that drove the cost higher, because more personnel meant more equipment and more concentration, and more weapons handed to more humans. It took 14 months. 14 months of the Concordance feeding its people into a planet that armed itself with everything we brought, everything we built, everything we tried to take, and at the end, everything we left behind. Because that's how it finished. Not with a human victory, with a Concordance retreat that armed the humans one final, total time. When Command finally accepted that the equation had no solution, that Earth could not be extracted at any cost the Concordance could bear, they ordered withdrawal. And withdrawal meant abandoning 14 months of infrastructure, the processing centers, the stockpiles, the equipment, the concentrated resources we'd gathered and couldn't ship fast enough. We left it all, fleeing a world that had bled us past the point any number could justify. And the humans took all of it. Of course they did. We didn't just lose the war. We equipped the winner on our way out the door, handing humanity in our retreat the single largest transfer of advanced technology and concentrated resource in their species' history. We came to take Earth's resources. We left having given Earth ours. The accounting didn't just turn negative. It inverted completely, catastrophically, into the worst trade in the history of the Concordance. We spent 400,000 lives and a fleet's worth of technology to make our intended victim materially richer and more dangerous than they'd been before we arrived. That's the backfire. Not that humans turned everything into weapons, that we brought them more everything. I have to tell you what it did to the Concordance, because the Concordance is the real casualty of this story, more than the 400,000, more than the city we destroyed, more than me. A civilization can survive losing a war. We'd lost engagements before, in 900 surveys, the odd, costly world, the occasional miscalculation. You absorb it, you revise, you go on. What a civilization cannot survive is losing its premise. And Earth didn't cost the Concordance a war. It cost the Concordance the equation, the faith, the thing underneath everything, the certainty that the universe could be assessed, that value could be counted, that a world was the sum of its resources and a threat was the sum of its weapons, and the right number could tell you, always, what to do. Because here is what every Sethic eventually had to face. In the years after, the thing that came apart in us slowly, the way a building comes apart after the foundation cracks. If my assessment of Earth was wrong, and it was, catastrophically, fatally wrong, then it wasn't wrong because I made an arithmetic error. It was wrong because the entire method was blind to something real. The method counted weapons and missed the world that was all weapon. And if the method could be that blind, that completely, about a world we'd surveyed for 200 days, then the method could be wrong about anything. Every assessment the Concordance had ever made, every number at the bottom of every report, every world we'd taken and every world we'd left, all of it rested on a way of seeing that had just been proven able to miss the most important thing about a world entirely. The Concordance never recovered its certainty. How could it? We'd built a civilization on the faith that the numbers told the truth, and a planet of farmers had shown us that the numbers could be perfectly correct and catastrophically wrong at the same time, that you could count everything and understand nothing. The expansion stopped, not by decision at first, but by paralysis. How do you survey a new world for extraction when you've learned that your survey cannot see the thing that matters? How do you trust a number when the best surveyor your civilization ever produced wrote a perfect number that killed 400,000 people? The assessment core, my life's work, was disbanded within a decade because no one could be made to trust an assessment again. And a merchant civilization that cannot trust its assessments is not a merchant civilization anymore. It's just a lot of frightened accountants who have learned the universe doesn't fit in their ledgers. We didn't lose a war to Earth. We lost the ability to believe in the only thing that had ever held us together. The humans didn't conquer the concordance. They just showed it once with total clarity that it had never understood what it was doing, and a civilization that learns that about itself does not go on the way it did before. The slow merchant empire that had counted and taken its way across 1,000 worlds simply stopped, sat down in the dark, and began the long, quiet work of becoming something smaller and humbler and, I want to believe, eventually wiser. I should tell you what the galaxy learned, because it's the one good thing, and because it's the line I should have written in my report and didn't. After Earth, after the concordance came apart, the other powers of the galaxy did what powers do. They studied the catastrophe to make sure it never happened to them. And the lesson they took was not Earth is strong or humans are dangerous, though both were true. The lesson, written into the survey doctrine of a dozen civilizations afterward, was the line I'd missed, the line that would have stopped everything if I'd been wise enough to write it 200 days into my survey. You cannot assess a civilization by counting its weapons, because the category of weapon is not universal. Some species do not divide the world into tools and weapons. For such a species, the assessment of military threat is identical to the assessment of total capability. Every resource, every tool, every object, every person is a potential weapon, and the threat is therefore the entire civilization, undivided. Such species cannot be invaded for resources, because their resources are their armament, and to take the one is to face the other. Catalog such worlds as do not extract, do not occupy, do not test, trade if they are willing, leave if they are not. There is no third option that does not end in the ledger. That's the doctrine now, across a dozen civilizations, the line I should have written. It's named, in some of their records after me, the Reb exception, the class of worlds where the surveyor's question is not how much is this worth and how well is it defended, but the deeper question I learned too late. Does this species know the difference between a tool and a weapon? And if it doesn't, turn the ship around, because you cannot win a war against a world that is already, in its own mind, entirely made of weapons, and was simply waiting to be reminded. The galaxy is safer now for that line. Fewer worlds get invoices from the sky. Fewer accountants fly into warehouses full of guns. It cost 400,000 Sethic lives and a human city and my entire civilization's faith in itself to write that one line of doctrine. I'd give anything to have written it before. I wrote it after. It's the only thing I ever made that mattered, and I made it out of the wreckage of the worst thing I ever did. And me, the surveyor, I have to account for myself because I wrote the number, and a man who wrote the number has to live with what the number did. I never went home. There wasn't really a home to go to. The concordance that had been my whole world was busy coming apart, and the disgraced surveyor who'd refused an order and then been proven catastrophically, civilization-endingly right, was not a welcome figure among a people trying very hard not to look directly at what had happened to them. I was the proof. I was the man who'd written the perfect report, and then watched it kill everyone, and then said so out loud. No one wanted me near. So I stayed, near Earth. I requested and was eventually granted in the chaos of the withdrawal, a kind of exile that suited everyone, the surveyor who'd lost his nerve, left behind to observe the world he'd failed to understand, a living footnote to a catastrophe my people wanted to forget. And I spent the rest of my life learning the thing I'd failed to count, watching humans. Not as a surveyor, I was done assessing, done counting, done pretending the universe fit in a ledger, just watching. And the thing I learned, the deepest thing, the thing that finally let me put down the guilt enough to tell this story, was this. The humans were never trying to be terrible. That's what my whole civilization missed, right to the end, and what made the missing so complete. We thought we discovered a species of uniquely dangerous warriors, a world that turned everything to violence out of some martial nature. But that wasn't it at all. The reason humans don't separate tools from weapons isn't that they love violence. It's the opposite. It's that they've spent their whole existence on a world that was always, indifferently, trying to kill them, storms and beasts and famines and each other. And they survived not by being warriors but by being ready. By looking at every single thing in their world and understanding, in the oldest part of themselves, that it might one day have to save a life or take one, and you don't get to know in advance which. A people who have buried enough of their own to a world that didn't care learns to see every object as both gift and weapon, because that's what objects are, when you live somewhere that's trying to kill you. The category we couldn't understand wasn't a category of aggression. It was a category of survival. They turn everything into weapons because everything, to them, has always been the difference between living and dying, and they never had the luxury of pretending otherwise. That city we destroyed, preparing to die, turning itself into one last weapon, they weren't doing it out of hate. They were doing it out of love, for the ones behind them. The same reason a human does anything that costs them everything. We mistook the most loving species I ever encountered for the most dangerous one, because the love and the danger in a human come out of the exact same place, and look from the outside, from orbit, through a surveyor's instruments, exactly the same. I never learned to count that. There's no instrument for it. There's no line in any ledger for this species turns everything into a weapon because it loves its own too much to ever stop fighting for them. But it's the truest thing I know about Earth, and I learned it too late to save anyone, and I've spent a long exile making sure that at least it gets said. So, I wrote the report that started the invasion. I want to end where I began, because I've earned the right to, finally, after telling it true. I was the best surveyor my civilization ever produced. In 40 years, I never wrote a number that the extraction came in under. And I flew to a blue-green world, and I counted it, the water, the metals, the energy, the wealth, and I counted its weapons and found them negligible. And I wrote at the bottom of my report the number that brought 400,000 of my people down out of the sky to collect it. The arithmetic was perfect. The number was wrong, because I had measured a world the way you measure inventory, and I had invaded a world that does not experience itself as inventory. A world where there is no line between the resource and the weapon, between the tool and the killing thing, between the thing that feeds you and the thing that saves you, and the thing that ends your enemy, because to a human those have always been the same object, picked up and pointed differently as the moment requires. We came to take everything Earth had. And Earth turned everything it had into the reason we left, not because the humans were monsters, not because they prepared some trap, not because they were secretly strong, but because we had walked with our spreadsheets and our certainty into the one place in all the dark where the most basic thing we believed about the universe, that a world is the sum of its resources, and a threat is the sum of its weapons, was simply, fundamentally, fatally false. There is no number that wins a world that is already, in its own heart, made entirely of weapons. I learned that too late to save my people. I wrote it down too late to undo what I'd done. But I wrote it down, the Reb exception, the line I missed. And the galaxy turns its ships around now, at worlds like Earth, because one surveyor learned, in the wreckage of his own perfect arithmetic, the only assessment that ever actually mattered. Some things cannot be counted. And the moment you try to take them, you find out why.